You're listening to Puma Podcast.
She unwittingly laid the groundwork for the work of the Department of Migrant Workers. I think that was very, very serendipitous because I don't think she ever aspired to be a secretary for a new department. I mean, who would have thought that we would have this new department? But she was able to do that.
Susan Toots Ople, the first secretary of a brand new Department of Migrant Workers, passed away on August 2022, 2023. I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and in this episode of Teka Teka News, we look back on the life and legacy of the very first secretary of the still very new Department of Migrant Workers.
I'm Lourdes Molina Fernandez. Everyone calls me Chuchay Fernandez for short. I'm the editor-in-chief of Business Mirror. I've been a journalist for over 4 decades. I first met Toots Ople personally when she was working in the Senate with her father, the late Senator Blas F. Ople.
Chuchay says she was in her late 30s when she first met Secretary Ople. Chuchay simply called her Toots. Toots was younger than Chuchay, and at that time was working as a speechwriter for her father, former senator and former labor minister, Blas Ople. Blas Ople served under the first Marcos administration for nearly 2 decades, and in the 1970s, he is credited with essentially planting the seeds for what would become a half-century of steady expansion for what we now call the OFW sector. From less than 100,000 initial contract workers sent to the Middle East in the 70s, there are now nearly 2 million Filipinos deployed in practically every country in the world.
I think she had this passion for helping solidify her father's legacy. But then the amazing thing is that it evolved into her own passion. She built upon it his obsession with helping the OFWs, which also grew from his obsession from being labor secretary for many years.
OFW remittances now pump more than $36 billion into the Philippine economy every year, as important a pillar as the BPO sector, and they are lifeblood for millions of Filipino families. Nearly 1 in 12 Filipino households have a family member working abroad, sending home cash for food, shelter, and school tuition. But after her father's long stint as labor secretary, Toots carried on as an NGO worker, and from there, she saw that OFWs and their families were also paying a price hard to measure in pesos and dollars. Children are deprived of the daily presence of their parents, among other things, while where those parents are working, there are difficult realities to contend with, from discrimination to safety and run-ins with foreign legal systems. Speaking at a CNN event, Secretary Toots captured in a few lines what OFWs represent and why they, Filipino parents and Filipino children, helping to lift each other to better lives, are so important to her and to the whole nation. Why OFWs have long been called Bagong Bayani, the new heroes.
The best heroes are the people you love the most. The best life is the one devoted to principles that you believe in and are prepared to fight for.
I think that NGO work allowed her a more fertile ground, a more flexible platform for maximizing all of the goodwill, all of the lessons, all of the opportunities that her father's networks from DFA to DOLE, all of that political network in the legislative, all of that she was able to mesh into her work as the head, as the founder of the Blas Ople Policy Center.
Toots' father, Blas Ople, had served as Foreign Affairs Secretary under President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo.
And then she started calling us, her media friends, and she was asking if they can throw some cases to us in case they're helping a group of OFWs, distressed OFWs. She started to be alarmed at the rate of increase in human trafficking cases involving the Philippines. And then she began to be alarmed that the Philippines was in danger of being on a sort of a blacklist as one of the hot zones for human trafficking. And that's when she started pushing buttons. That's when she started making calls, and she called on some of her father's friends in the legislative and in the executives. That's when she became really full-time NGO person.
Here's Secretary Toots.
When I was the head of my own NGO, we would experience that. Yung kumakatok galing sa probinsya, yung anak nila nilalapastangan o pinahihirapan or in some cases nga hindi nila alam kung buhay o patay dahil hindi na nila nakakausap. And I see the need na wag nang dagdagan pa yung burden ng mga magulang o mga kapatid ng mga workers natin abroad.
In 2013, the U.S. State Department recognized her work as president of the Blas F. Ople Policy Center. Then Secretary of State John Kerry gave her the Trafficking in Persons Hero Award in Washington, D.C.
And if you notice, among the diplomats, the veteran members of the DFA, one of those she's closest to is former USEC Rafael Seguis. And Rafael Seguis is known in the migrant workers community as one of the most veterans, the most experienced in helping out OFWs in distress, whether they were abused or, more importantly, if they are in conflict zones. And all of that Toots imbibed. And for me, that was her singular accomplishment, that she was able to maximize all of that experience, all of the networks, all of the lessons and tips that were passed on to her across generations. And she fused it all, and she used it as the foundation for her work in the Department of Migrant Work. So I always said that the decision of President Marcos Jr. to appoint her, that was a very inspired decision.
More on the legacy Secretary Toots leaves behind after a quick break. At her wake, President Bongbong Marcos, the son of President Ferdinand Marcos Sr., paid tribute to Secretary Toots, the daughter of his father's deeply respected labor minister.
Mula nung na-appoint siya na Department of Migrant Workers, pagka hinahanap ko siya, sasabihin ko, may problema sa Kuwait. Paano? Sir, wala na dito. Nandun na. Nauna na yung bagong panautusan. Andun na siya sa Kuwait. O may problema sa Riyadh. O nandun na. Nauna na. Tumatawag na siya, magre-report na siya. Ganon si Toots, hindi na nag-aantay ng may initiative. She's so professional. At saka talagang alam na alam niya yung trabaho niya.
When deadly clashes broke out in Sudan in April this year, hundreds of OFWs had to be repatriated. Secretary Toots Ople traveled to Egypt to personally oversee the evacuation.
It shouldn't matter whatever papers they have or if they don't have any papers at all. To quote the President, kung marunong mag-Tagalog, marunong mag-Bisaya, marunong mag-Ilocano, marunong ng iba't ibang dialect sa atin, Pinoy yan. So we will help.
I asked Chuchay about the Department of Migrant Workers, established 5 decades after Blas Ople opened the doors to OFWs, and then just in time for his daughter, Toots, to be universally considered a logical and much respected figure to lead it.
I think much of the groundwork has been laid, but it's still kind of fragile because there's still some unfinished business. And as I understand it, one of her biggest unfinished work, but it's nearing completion from what I heard, is helping the thousands of OFWs who were displaced during the Saudi financial crisis to get their back pay. And it is amazing how she has been able to blaze trails, to knock on doors, to be able to meet with very high-ranking Saudi officials, and to get them to really commit to pay the compensation of our thousands of OFWs. And back here, I can imagine it's still the bureaucracy. It's an evolving work because when you couple an entire department out of 4 different agencies, there's really a lot of transition phase that have to be experienced. And practically the first half of the year that she was working, she really had no real budget. She was just coupling funds with the help of auditors and finance officials.
It was no secret that Toots was battling cancer in her final years. She was in remission when she was tapped to set up and lead the DMW in 2022.
I think she was kind of scared also of the kind of pressure that put on her. But then maybe she realized that there's no one else in a better position to lay the groundwork for this. I guess she just underestimated the pressure she would be under, the stresses she would be under. I think it was the motivation to do what has to be done. I think it trumped everything else. She would always say that she's on top of it. And it really made me so happy that she could do her work very well as we all expected. That's why we were all surprised.
Hanggang sa huli, nagtatrabaho pa rin siya. Ngunit sinasabi ko nga, tuloy-tuloy yan dahil hindi trabaho sa kanya yan. Ang ginagawa niya na tumutulong sa ating mga OFW, ang ginagawa niya talaga ay isinabuhay niya talaga ang pagmamahal ng kapwa Pilipino.
Let's all pray that the appointing power makes another inspired appointment, because if it goes to the wrong persons or if there's regulatory capture of sorts, then it would be a big waste. I mean, a great woman practically gave her life for her job. So the least we can do to honor her memories, to make sure that this important task, this important legacy is.
And if I shed a tear because I feel sorry, I do not feel sorry for Toots. Because after her heart beat its last, her soul went immediately to heaven. And for that, I have no doubt. I feel sorry for us, her friends, her family, because we've lost a wonderful person, a wonderful friend. I feel sorry for the Filipinos who are living and working abroad, because they have lost the best champion that they ever had in the history of overseas workers for Filipinos.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. Follow Teka Teka News on your favorite podcast app, or listen to us for free on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you like this episode, please take the time to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening.